sitting here thinking about my mental health, and every time I've thought about one thing, I was able to peel back another layer. There really is no easy way to do this. We should probably just get into it. So we'll get to the business end first. I just wanted to take this opportunity to welcome any new subscribers. There's been quite a few over the last few months, and I haven't welcomed you all, and I'm really sorry. I welcome you now. I'm so grateful that you're here. And I just want to say that if you enjoy these videos, then please consider subscribing and liking and commenting. I love comments. And make sure you click on that notification bell. That's your way of being nosy whenever I upload a video. Okay? Also, I have Buy Me a Coffee if you want to support me on my health journey. Absolutely no obligation whatsoever. Now, I've taken the time to backtrack as far as I can, and I seem to stop in the 80s. And if I was going to pick one moment where the mental health started to decline, it would be during this time. There is nothing prior to that that would indicate that there was a jolt to my system that challenged my mental health in any way. It was when we came out to Australia. And it's a serendipity, there it is again, folks, that I actually reached that particular point, because it is something that I'm covering on my mother's channel in the next month or so. Yep, here we are. I sat here and I made some bullet points so that I could get it straight in my head and get it in order. I don't know if this is going to be what my subscriber asked for. I'm hoping that you will get something out of it, whatever that may be. All I can really do here is share my journey, present and past, because everything in the past is what brings us to this moment. So without much further ado, I'm going to start talking about when it started. There was a large shift in the 80s when... This is hard. Now that I'm recording this, this is hard. Come on, you can do it, girl. Let's go. There was a large shift in the 80s when Dad was stopped by certain opera management from listening to his wife singing. Now, I could give you the long story, but I'm going to give you the cliff notes, okay? The opera company at the time was staging Wagner's Ring Cycle, and it was being filmed because I seem to recall it was ABC that was filming it for a documentary. That's my very faint memory of that. But it was being filmed because at the time it was quite historical, because it, to the best of my knowledge, even at this point, it had never actually been performed in Australia. So it was a big deal. Now, Dad was standing at the door of this particular rehearsal. The doors of these rehearsal rooms were thick, really thick, because they were soundproof. And my father probably had the door open maybe half of a quarter of an inch. I mean, tiny. The biggest joy he had in his life was listening to his wife sing. That's all he wanted. He didn't want grand things like, you know, boats and cars and clothes and jewelry and this and that and the other. All he really wanted was to be able to listen to his wife sing. That was his greatest joy. And while he was listening through this very tiny, tiny gap, he was tapped on the shoulder by management and was told that due to filming, he was not allowed to have the door open. I mean, it was literally half of a quarter of an inch. And this meant that he was stopped from listening to the only joy he had in life. And he stormed off, and he got stopped by a colleague of Mum's who tried and successfully calmed him down. Mum finished the rehearsal and she came out into the green room and found out what was going on, and she was furious. I sat there watching this all unfold in front of me, and she'd never been one to make a scene like this ever, so it was a real shock. And I remember her words. She had the score, she had her handbag on one arm, she had the score under the arm, on the other arm, and she shouted out, "Thems that make the rules can sing the roles." And she then proceeded to fling this score of Valkyrie, quite a thick, sizable score. It is Wagner after all. She frisbeed it from one end of the room to the other, and it hit the other side of the room. And she then said, "Come on, Mywin, we're going home." When we got home, Dad started packing a suitcase. He was going to leave because, as he said at the time, "If I can't hear you sing, Rita, then there's nothing for me here." He got to the airport and discovered that he didn't have his passport. So he came home. Fortunately, by the time he got home, he had calmed down somewhat. By that I mean he dismissed the idea of leaving. But divorce was on the table as a result. And it didn't happen, of course, but it dishevelled the family quite a bit. It really did change the dynamics dramatically of the family, of the three of us, like big time. You see, Dad was a singer in his own right. He was a tenor, and he was the master of teaching that technique. I was fortunate enough to have lessons from him. Not many, but I did have lessons from him, and he was a master. He had a stream of students that he taught over the years. He gave up his career about 18 months after I was born. Now, that was a series of events. We're talking, I was born in 1967, and Dad at the time was in the chorus, and Mum was singing in the chorus as well, but she was starting to get principal roles. I apparently was enjoying every minute of it because this was before we had, it was all public transport stuff. And, the parents were ships that passed in the night. And I was fine, by the way, 15, 16 months old. I was at the train station for most of the time. So it was, I get to see the choo-choos. I was happy, apparently. I loved it. But unfortunately, Dad's health, he was getting run down. And Mum wasn't great, but she was doing better than Dad. But Dad's health was particularly run down. He was bad. So they sat down one day, and it really was as simple as this. They sat down one day, they had the books open, like the accounts, and they went, "Right, okay," Mum said, "who is earning the most money next year?" We're talking like, 1968, 69, something like that. And it just so happened that it was Mum who was earning the most money that following year. And Dad said, "All right, that's it. You have the career, Rita, and I will stay home with the baby." And it really was as simple as that. Now, in the 60s, especially the late 60s, that was a fairly big deal because women were not really known to be the breadwinners in those days. So back to the 80s, when those certain things went down and Dad was stopped, I noticed that there was an awful lot of resentment coming from my father towards me. And our relationship as father and daughter declined quite considerably. Poor mum was in the middle of it all, but yeah, it was bad. It was bad. Really, really bad. Now, I want to make something very clear here. I have always said that I was loved by my parents. I was loved by my father, okay? So I just want everybody to really understand here that I won't tolerate anyone dissing my father with what I'm about to share with you. Such comments will be deleted because I just can't. No, I'm not doing that, okay? So I'm just letting you know. You have to understand why he was in the headspace that he was in. I mean, because of what happened with the opera company, he started to drink more. So all of the following was just not coming from a good place, like at all. The resentment came out towards me. It was an onslaught. He would call me a bitch. He would call me a cow, constantly tell me, you haven't even started yet. And I can still hear him saying it. He was Welsh, you know. And I remember one night there was an argument between me and him, of course. And Mum was trying to calm the waters. And he turned around. He said, I don't know why you bother fighting for her. She's not bloody worth it. So that kind of onslaught was fairly consistent, right? But that was one of the reasons why I took over recording all of my mother's performances, because basically he was too plastered to do it. And if it was going to get done, it had to be done by somebody, and that somebody was me. So I took over that. But there were some silver linings. I mean, later in life, we did find common ground. We found at least friendship. And even though he barely said it in his later years, I do know that he loved me. He did. He did. So now we jump to 1994, which was the year that my father died. Mum and I did grieve together because we were all we had. I mean, I spent a year at home with Mum so that we could support each other. And this was technically my first introduction into shutting the world out. And in that time, I got what I now know as my first panic attack. I thought I was having a heart attack. So, imagine my surprise when my own mother told me, no, it's a panic attack. And that she had to remind me that she had something similar when her father died. And totally went over my head that she actually wrote about it in her book, in her autobiography. And it took that moment for me to go, realize, Mum had the same thing. So I remember that being an eye-opener, that I missed that. And I've read the book how many times up until that point? Anxiety became a very strong part of my life. And not proud to say it, so did Xanax. Xanax and me were the best of buds. That was the first thing that was prescribed to me. It coloured everything in my life. I wanted to remain at home, but Mum was not having it. And she basically sat me down and said, look, I'd love you to stay home. I really would. Of course I would. And I'll support you financially for forever. But it's not about me and what I want anymore. It's about you and the life that you need to have, that you need to make for yourself. Adrian would be the first one to say, you're not the easiest person to say something to. Believe me, my mother and him would have that in common and be going, you're not wrong, Rita. I know exactly that's the sort of conversation that they'd have. So I did exactly that. I tried the world with anxiety at my heels, but everything was harder. Like everything. The simplest things in the world were just harder to do. Getting out of bed to go to work was harder to do. Little did I know that it was not just anxiety that was going, hello. It was depression as well. So I just navigated that as best I could. You know, there was no talk of any kind of counselling in those days. None of it. None of it. Just plodded along as usual. So now we come to 2001 and the year my mother died. I mean, I had met my now husband a matter of months before she died. If not for that, I would have shut the world out. I mean, closed the door and called it a day, and that would have been it. But my now husband showed me the meaning of carrying on. I mean, he showed me the meaning of it, but no one can show you how to do that. And so I just did this thing called life, such that it was. I mean, little did I know that these were all the moments that were leading me down the path of what actually ended up being an extended crisis, but it really did. It really did. I mean, I had no real skills to deal with any of it, just that plodding along attitude. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we moved house in 2003. I had my first son in 2003. My now husband and I got married in 2006. I had my second son in 2008. I mean, those are all huge, life-changing moments, events. And I did that without my parents. I mean, I was that caught up in it all. I couldn't even get married without having them represented there. And by that, I mean I got married at Blues Point Reserve with the Sydney Opera House in the background. Short of actually having the wedding ceremony on the steps of the Opera House, I couldn't even get married without them being there in the background. I even got married on their anniversary day. But that's where I was. These things were just all life-changing things, and I had, looking back, it's almost like I had no skills whatsoever to navigate them. None. I was just literally on autopilot, plodding along. So, you know, after my second son was born, this is when I found Tony Ferguson. And we know about that. And we know about me discovering the ketogenic diet. But it was the mental state that was wrong. I was just doing the thing on autopilot with no real direction. I was like, where do I go? What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I go? I mean, I felt like I was being pulled between two worlds, and it was made worse by the fact that I couldn't listen or watch my mother singing. I couldn't even listen to other singers singing anything that she used to sing. So I shut it down. All of it. I shut opera down. I shut classical music down. I didn't listen to my mother for years and years and years and years and years. I mean, I felt like my childhood had been ripped from me, and I wasn't prepared to be an adult. I didn't know how. I just didn't know how. I mean, towards the end of the Tony Ferguson, my mental health was just so scattered. I felt like I couldn't cope with anything, like at all. The simplest decisions, couldn't make them, just couldn't make them. Everything was just too hard. And that was when I was prescribed escitalopram. And I was on that for well over 10 years. Sheesh. I mean, I won't lie, things were great for a while, but ooh, that fog comes in. And that was when I truly was on what I would classify as a true autopilot. I was there, but I was just not there. Like dead eyes, you know, like dead fish eyes. Like there was just like nothing there. There was nothing. Yeah. So, I had a glimmer of hope for a while there when I made friends with this fellow mother of a child that went to the same school as both my sons, and everything was great for a while. And then I think I mentioned in another video that, she dumped me via SMS. And that was when I closed the door. I'm like, okay, well, I've done this before. I've closed the door before. I'm going to do it again. And it wasn't the front door I shut, it was the garage door. Yeah, that's where it put me. I mean, I eventually slept in the garage because, I'd gained so much weight and I was in so much pain that going up and down those stairs filled me with the fear of just breaking my neck. I actually remember the last time I walked down those stairs and it was terrifying. I'm like, I'm going to break my neck. One wrong foot and that's it. I'm done for. That's it. It's over. My kids had to start walking to and from school because I had to go past this woman's house who dumped me on an SMS. Had to go past her house every time I wanted to take them to school, pick them up from school, or go to the shops. So, hello, we're just going to avoid that and just not go past it at all. We're just going to stop driving. So that means I got groceries delivered as well. The spiral was long and very steep, and this spiral was just the crisis extending at every turn. Longer, and it seemed like it was a bottomless pit. It seemed like it was. I had absolutely no idea where I was, and I felt powerless to get out. I just didn't know how. My kids, I hate to say this, my kids took full advantage of it by manipulating the heck out of me to their benefit, as kids often do, but they ran with it. They really did run with it. My husband had to take over all the parental duties because, well, I was just in no fit mental state to be a parent. I just wasn't. And he tried to reach me. He really did, even going as far as threatening me with divorce, but nothing got through. Nothing. Just. And I mean, by the time COVID came around, the isolation was nothing to me. Nothing. I was already in it. I mean, it filled me with joy that my family were keeping their distance. It meant I didn't have to deal with anything. So it played to my wheelhouse. Then, just before we decided to move to Queensland, something clicked where the escitalopram was concerned. Something just was a light bulb. It was that tiny little light. It was tiny. It was the smallest little glimmer of light. I realized that because at the time, I mean, I still do have some frustrations with my youngest son, just so we're clear. But at the time, the frustrations were like, and there was a very familiar feeling to it, those interactions between me and my son. The feeling I was having at the time were like my father and I when we were at odds. But this time I was the parent and Josh was the kid. I wasn't and never have been as scathing as my father was, but it was the same familiar feeling. And that was when I realized that it was time to relook at the meds situation, the escitalopram, because it was then that I sort of realized, okay, maybe we've reached a ceiling here with this particular medication. Gonna have to look at that, Incidentally, I stopped taking escitalopram about a year after we moved up here to Queensland. So, yay. But then anyway, we decided we were going to move up to Queensland. And even when we made that decision, I fully realized that I would not be getting on a plane, that I would have to drive up because A, I'd be way too big for the seating. B, my mobility was absolute shite. So getting to the gate to get onto the plane wasn't going to happen. And of course, I have a fear of flying. That is still a thing. I still am fearful of flying, but you know what? I'll cross that bridge when it arrives, not if, when it arrives. So what does all that mean? I mean, it means I had to leave the garage, didn't it? There was something at this point that had me actually feeling like I needed to get out. Not out of the house, but like I had to get out of my own way. I mean, it was a tiny, tiny moment, and it happened when I finally drove out of the driveway of the old house. It was like, oh yeah. Something was like, as I was driving forward, it was like, here is the forward momentum. Here it is. This is what's going to get me moving. This is what it is. I mean, that drive up the coast was long, but joyful, but long. My eldest son was with me for that journey, and he was a great comfort and support to his mother. And he let me play my 12-hour Spotify list. You know, all those cringy songs that kids don't want to hear, that the parents used to listen to. Yep, he let me play all of them. Some on repeat. He was a great support. Now, when we got to the motel halfway at Coffs Harbour, we stayed at the Windmill Motel. And that night, I slept in a bed for the first time in 5 years. And I can confirm that I slept like a log. Like a log. And the next morning when I got up, I was very fortunate in that the motel had a bench outside the motel room. And I sat on that bench in the sunshine. And for about a month after I drove up here, my husband was staying with friends, and I had to stay in a hotel for about a month before we could move into this house. And I stayed at 2 different motels, and I made sure I sat in the sunshine every morning, because I was in motel rooms a lot. But for some reason, that confinement, being in a room like that, would be like being in the garage. But I, for some reason, couldn't stand it. I had to be outside. Don't know what that was about. Maybe it was that forward momentum of driving away from the past, letting it go and moving forward towards something, whatever that may be. Maybe that's what it was. But then we moved into our house here. And even though I did refuse to sit in a garage, I made my home outside here. And I have reveled in sitting out here for most of the day. But as time went by, while we're up here, I was still somewhat isolated because I exchanged the garage for here. Pain still in the legs. I remember my husband saying to me one day, if the pain is that bad, Mywin, please just stay in bed one day and rest. And my response was, no. As long as I can move, I am getting out of this bed every day. And this was the norm for a long while up here. You know, rolling around on an office chair, sitting outside, still getting everyone to do stuff for me. And then Adrian came up here to visit me for the first time in 10 years. I was in a very dark, dank place, folks. I had some faculties, but not much. Not much at all. It was more like glimmers, fleeting moments that I was still there, but not there. Just My ability to decide anything in the old house was non-existent, and that determination didn't really start to shine through until I was adamant I was not going to be staying in bed as long as I could move. That was the first moment that made me go, where'd that come from? Kind of deal. But essentially, by the time that Adrian came up here, I had nothing for myself. I wasn't doing anything for myself, mental or health-wise, nothing. I was barely existing and waiting to die. Yeah, that might be hard for you to listen to. I was barely existing and waiting to die. Cannot stress that enough, because that is the truth. Bottom line. Food was my comfort. My family was my discomfort. My past was out of reach. My present was just like, ugh, ugh. I had no idea how I fit in the current world. I had no idea where my place was in the grand scheme of things. My past was gone. My childhood with it. I could not see anything past my nose, thanks to the fog. I had no purpose. I felt useless. I felt fat, which I was and am, but I'm working on it. I felt ugly. I felt worthless. I felt unheard. I felt unloved. After all these years, I believed I deserved the bad, because that was all I was good for. I don't know why you fight for her, Rita. She's not worth it. Not long after Adrian left, I started a channel for my mother, and from that started a journey of some hardcore exposure therapy. And Adrian has been there for every single step of it. So was my husband and my kids. But sad to say, I was overpassionate about it, and it started getting on their nerves. My husband could see what I couldn't and didn't until Wagner's Ring was staged up here in Queensland. He could see that I was driving myself ragged, and saw that I was starting to burn myself out for a community that he could see was being a total toxic bore. He tried to tell me. He really did. Nah. Wasn't getting through. Then I started researching carnivore and finding all the amazing stories on there and the information. I've said before, I typed in carnivore in the search bar in YouTube and And then there was a very distinct shift, probably one of the biggest. Then Opera Australia put on Wagner's Ring Cycle at QPAC here in Queensland. And I remember a post that Opera Australia put up on their Facebook about the trucks that had the set for this production that were currently travelling up the highway towards Brisbane. And Adrian was actually coming up here to see the third cycle. They were doing 3 runs of it, because there's 4 operas in the tetralogy. Brain fog moment. Tetralogy. And that moment that they posted about those trucks with that set, that ignited a spark, a very, very familiar spark of excitement. It sort of allowed me to remember what it was like on the very few occasions when Mum, Dad and I were in the car driving up the motorways in England, when the English National Opera trucks contained the touring set for the 70s Ring Cycle, and how rare it was to see those trucks on the motorway. and to pass them on the way, knowing that the set that my mother was going to be standing on were in those trucks. Also remembering those great big trucks being parked round the back of the theatre at the scenery docks, watching all this stuff getting unloaded and taken into the theatre. That moment when they posted that about the trucks, that did something. That did something, because it occurred to me just how long it had been since I'd been to an opera, and my heart just ached that I couldn't travel 40 minutes down the road to the one that was staged in December last year. And all because of the condition that my body's in. Shame set in, but that shame wasn't there for long. It really wasn't. Because in addition to all those wonderful stories that I found about carnivore, coupled with this moment happening 40 minutes down the road, that shame very quickly turned into determination to return to what I love, to be surrounded by music. So I started carnivore on the 1st of January 2024, promising to myself that I would move mountains to make that happen again, so that I can sit in a theatre and listen again. And then the fog lifted. Ooh. I mean, since then, so many things have occurred to me. The honesty I have about myself is a lot more profound. It's cutting and to the point at myself, if you know what I mean. I can see where I went wrong, and I'm resigned to fix it. I mean, I still have a way to go, a long way to go. And even though my mental health is better, I still have much to learn. Oh boy, do I have much to learn. I mean, like a lot of people, I'm just waiting to exhale. You know, that moment of, that moment of relief. And I don't know, but I have a very sneaky suspicion I know when that's going to happen. It's going to be when I'm in the theatre again and I'm sitting there and, you know, you hear the rumbles of everybody talking, and then the lights go down, then the conductor comes out, he stands there, takes a bow, and you know that this is about to start. The performance is about to start. I firmly believe that that is when I will just go, oh, I made it. Because, you know, even though my journey started in the 80s and continues to this day, I know that I can be honest with myself enough to know that the journey never ends. Life is always going to be about learning. What you did yesterday is in the past. You can hopefully learn from it. Hopefully. And what you do now and tomorrow is really important. And at the very, very least, no one can say I'm not trying. It would be safe to say, and with all respect to my father, that I have now really started. I want you to be kind to those around you. Protect your peace. Don't take any crap. And be kind to yourself. I love you guys very, very much. Until Monday. Bye for now.